When you think of a nation, you probably think of borders, right? Mountains, rivers, a line on a map. But what if a nation was born not from land, but from an idea first? That's what we're digging in today. We're going to trace the incredible ideological journey that gave birth to Pakistan, a story that really challenges how we think about what a country even is. So let's dive in.
And yeah, that's really the big question here, isn't it? How does a set of beliefs about identity, about justice, about politics, how does that actually become a country? With a flag and a place on the world map. This whole story is just a fascinating look at the raw power of an idea. To really get our heads around the idea of Pakistan, we need to rewind the clock. Way, way back. Long before its creation, we have to start by looking at the social fabric of the subcontinent before Islam arrived, because it was a world built on a super rigid, totally unchangeable hierarchy. Now this shows you exactly what that social ladder looked like. It's pretty stark. Your entire identity was basically decided for you at birth. At the very top, you had the Brahmins, the religious elite. Then came the Kshatriyas, the warriors and the rulers. Below them, the Vaishyas, who were the merchants, and then the Shudras, the laboring class. And then, completely outside of this whole system, were the Dalits, who were socially ostracized and given the absolute worst jobs.
So what's the crucial takeaway here? There was pretty much no way to move up. Your destiny was sealed the second you were born. And you can imagine, a system where your entire life, your job, your social standing, your dignity is all predetermined? Well, that's a recipe for some deep, deep frustration. It created this powerful hunger for an alternative.
And that alternative, it arrived. It came in the form of a new social and spiritual order. This marks the introduction of Islam to the subcontinent, and it wasn't just as a religion, but as a completely contrasting vision for how a society could work. This just brilliantly shows you the contrast. It's night and day, really. On one side, you've got this rigid pyramid you're born into. On the other, you have this ideal of universal equality and brotherhood. Where one system was all about exclusion, the other proposed a universal identity. And according to our source, this promise, that a person could be judged on merit, not their birthright, was an absolutely revolutionary concept at the time. And this wasn't just some theory, right? Our source highlights real-world examples that brought this whole idea to life. You had Arab traders doing business with people from any caste. You had an early administration in Sindh known for protecting all its communities. And maybe the most stunning example, a former slave, Qutbuddin Aibak, rises all the way up to become a ruler. Think about that for a second. In the old system, that was completely unthinkable. It was proof that a different world was actually possible.
Okay, so let's hit the fast-forward button. For centuries, Muslim dynasties ruled big parts of the subcontinent. But by the 1800s, there's a new power in charge, the British. And a single event, the failed uprising of 1857, would become this massive turning point that changed absolutely everything.
This timeline really captures just how quickly things changed. First, in 1857, this huge joint uprising is brutally crushed. Just 1 year later, the British Crown steps in and seizes direct control, and that's the end of the East India Company's rule. And it's out of that chaos and defeat that a new response starts to emerge, a whole new movement of Muslim intellectual revival, led by figures like Sir Syed Ahmed Khan.
The aftermath of 1857 was, frankly, devastating for the Muslim community. The British, according to the source, blamed them way out of proportion for the rebellion. They were systematically pushed out of positions of power and influence, from the army, from government jobs, from their land. It was just a period of deep social and economic decline.
And this is where the thinking of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan becomes so critical. He looked at this new, bleak reality and came up with a two-part strategy. First, he was a huge champion for modern education to help lift the community up. But second, he issued this really stark political warning. His analysis was basically this: in any future democracy based on pure majority rule, the Muslim minority would be permanently overpowered.
That warning, while it laid the groundwork for a powerful new political ideology. Faced with this prospect of becoming a permanent minority, Muslim thinkers started to craft a different vision for their future, one that was based on being a separate and distinct community.
And this is the core concept, the two-nation theory. It's really important to get this. It wasn't just about a religious difference. The argument was that Muslims and Hindus were basically two separate nations, not just in faith, but in culture, in history, in their entire social outlook. And therefore, they each needed their own political future to really thrive. This table breaks down the key differences that the supporters of the theory would always point to. On one side, a social structure they saw as based on equality versus one based on caste, a philosophy of universal brotherhood versus social stratification. And then, the big one, a starkly different political future. One side was facing the fear of being a permanent minority, while the other was assured of always being the majority.
So how did this theory, this powerful idea, actually become a country with borders on a map? This final section traces the political steps that turned the two-nation theory into a geographical reality.
And as you can see, it was a step-by-step process. It began with early demands for political protection, things like separate voting rights back in 1906. Then, key political disagreements, like the rejection of the Nehru Report, just dramatically sped everything up. This led to a clearer vision for a separate state, which was then formally demanded in the Lahore Resolution and finally achieved in 1947. Let's look at a few of these key moments.
The year 1928, as our source points out, was a critical breaking point. When the Nehru Report came out and rejected key Muslim demands for political safeguards, it sent a really powerful message. For many Muslim leaders, this was the moment they became convinced that a fair compromise within a united India was just not going to be possible.
And then, just 2 years later, the philosopher and poet Allama Iqbal gave that feeling a geographical shape. In this famous address, for the very first time, a major leader spelled out a clear vision of a consolidated Muslim state in the northwest of the subcontinent. The abstract idea now had a potential outline on a map.
And then you get to the Lahore Resolution in 1940. This was the moment of truth. The vision was no longer just a poet's dream or a philosopher's theory. It became the official, non-negotiable political goal of the All India Muslim League. The demand for Pakistan was now formally on the table.
But was this just an elite political demand? Did regular people want this? Well, the 1946 elections answered that question decisively. As this chart shows, the Muslim League, which was campaigning on the single issue of creating Pakistan, won an overwhelming majority of the seats reserved for Muslims. This was presented as a clear, democratic mandate for a separate nation.
And so, on August 14, 1947, Pakistan came into being. It was the endpoint of this long journey we've just traced, from a sense of social unease to a political awakening to a clear ideological demand. Its stated purpose? To create a homeland where the Muslim identity in all its forms could be protected from the perceived threat of being dominated by a majority.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The story of Pakistan, as we've seen it here, is a story of creating a nation to stand for an ideal of equality and self-determination. But it was also born from standing against a perceived threat of social hierarchy and political irrelevance. It really makes you wonder, for any nation, how much of its identity is defined by what it embraces versus what it chooses to reject.